It all began with thunder and rust, a forgotten train car at the edge of Montana. Everyone said it was cursed, but Grace Miller didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in second chances. When lightning struck the car one night, it split the floor open, and what she found buried beneath wasn't treasure. It was a promise from the past. A nurse's letters from 1946. A gold watch engraved, "For saving my life." Now a waitress, a child in a broken town, must discover what God left behind inside the steel walls of a miracle that never stopped beating. This is the story of the coffee car, where faith, kindness, and destiny meet. Morning broke over Willow Junction with the quiet dignity of a place forgotten by time. The town lay cradled between low Montana hills where fog lingered over pine groves and the scent of wood smoke drifted from chimneys that hadn't changed in 50 years. The air carried the crisp chill of late March winter, reluctant to surrender spring not yet bold enough to claim the land. Along the old railway line, frost clung to the steel like memory, and the single remaining train whistle, used by the freight service once a week, had become more echo than sound. Grace Miller stood beside her dented gray sedan hands, jammed into the pockets of her worn brown jacket, staring at the object of her reckless hope, a rusted train car half swallowed by weeds. She was 28, slender but strong from years of carrying coffee pots and trays across crowded diners. Her skin was fair, and wind kissed her hair, a tumble of chestnut waves usually tied low at her neck, and her eyes gray-green, like stormlight, seemed too soft for a life that had rarely been kind. Grace had the kind of quiet beauty that went unnoticed until she smiled, and she smiled less these days. Only a week earlier, she had stood behind the counter of the Silver Fork Diner, watching her boss lock the doors for the last time. The neon sign had flickered out in a final surrender to debt and disrepair. Mr. Hensley, her manager, had been kind, but broke, and the letter taped to the window closed permanently had felt like a verdict. Grace had walked home through the snow with a pink slip in her pocket and $63 in tips, wondering what came next for a girl with no degree, no husband, and no one waiting at home. Now she stood in the shadow of her answer. The train car stretched 40 feet long, its red paint faded to the color of dried blood, its windows clouded, one cracked in a spiderweb pattern. Moss crept along the wheels, rust freckled the bolts. But beneath the decay, there was something honest about it, something that reminded Grace of herself. She saw not the ruin, but the shape of possibility. A coffee bar where the counter could be built from reclaimed wood, a narrow aisle lined with stools, sunlight streaming through polished glass. The sound of boots crunching over gravel pulled her from her reverie. Mr. Howard approached with the slow precision of a man who had worked with his hands all his life. He was in his late 70s, tall but stooped from years of lifting iron, with a white beard that looked like steel shavings, and eyes the pale blue of cold water. His flannel shirt hung loose on narrow shoulders, and a thick canvas cap shaded his weathered face. Once he'd been a rail mechanic for the Burlington Northern, a man who'd known every bolt and brake line between Billings and Spokane. Now he was the last keeper of this forgotten relic. Miss Miller, he called his voice gravelly, polite, but reserved. "That's me," Grace said, stepping forward and brushing frost from her gloves. "Didn't think anyone would actually call about it," he muttered, glancing at the train car as though half hoping she'd change her mind. "She's a stubborn old thing." Built in the 40s, used as a crew car back when Willow Junction still had 3 trains a day. Got history, this one. Grace smiled faintly. "I like things with history." He studied her, the small woman, with eyes too determined for her size. "History's not always friendly, Miss Miller. This car's seen hard years. Some folks say it's haunted. I say it's just tired." "I'm tired too," Grace answered softly. "Maybe we'll get along." Mr. Howard grunted, half amused, half concerned. 500 like the ad said. Cash only. You'll need to sign the transfer papers. Car's yours, but the land isn't. Belongs to the county. You can keep her here so long as nobody complains." Grace hesitated only a moment before nodding. It was nearly all the money she had left, but she'd made harder bargains with fate before. Deal. While Mr. Howard shuffled through a folder of paperwork, Grace walked along the length of the car, running her hand over the cold steel. The metal hummed faintly beneath her palm, as if remembering the rhythm of rails. She could almost imagine voices inside laughter stories, the scrape of boots. The air smelled faintly of oil and pine needles. "You fixin' to live in it?" Mr. Howard asked when she returned. "I want to turn it into a cafe," she said. "A little place for travelers, maybe artists, anyone passing through. The coffee car." He blinked, then chuckled a low, rusty sound. "That's a new one. Used to be folks' open shops, not dreams." He signed the last page and handed her the key, an old brass thing, heavy as if it carried responsibility. "Just remember, this car's got stories. Some of 'em don't sleep easy." Grace turned the key in her hand, its weight grounding her. "Then I'll make sure it dreams better ones." They shook hands. His grip was rough but steady, his eyes softer now, as if he'd decided she was worth believing in. "You remind me of my daughter," he said quietly. Stubborn as a switch engine, thought she could outwork the world. She passed 3 winters ago. Cancer. "She'd have liked what you're trying to do." He tipped his cap, embarrassed by his own confession. "If you need help moving anything heavy, I still got my tools." "Thank you," Grace said, meaning it. By the time Mr. Howard's truck disappeared down the dirt road, the sky had turned the pale gold of late afternoon. Grace unlocked the door. The hinges screamed, and a gust of stale air rushed out, like an exhale held too long. Inside the car was dim and cold. Dust danced in the slanting light. Wooden benches lined the walls. A narrow counter jutted from one end where a small stove once stood. The floorboards creaked beneath her boots. She set down her backpack and breathed in the silence. For the first time in months, she felt something close to peace. A noise behind her made her jump, the quick patter of footsteps on gravel. Turning, she saw a boy standing near the door, clutching a broom taller than himself. He was maybe 10 years old, skinny but bright-eyed, with sandy hair sticking out from under a knit cap and a face both mischievous and wary. His clothes were a patchwork of thrift store wear, an oversized hoodie, frayed jeans, sneakers with untied laces. "You the lady bought the train?" he asked, voice curious but polite. Grace smiled cautiously. "That's me, and you are Eli. I live in the trailer park down the hill. My mom said you might need help cleaning. I'm good at cleaning. I helped Mr. Howard once, but he paid me in pie." Grace laughed, an unguarded, genuine sound that startled even her. "Pie sounds like a fair wage." Eli shrugged. "We could use money more, though. My mom's sick. Medicine's expensive." The words came matter of fact, not begging, just truth. Grace's heart tugged. "I can pay you $10 if you help me sweep this place out." 10? His eyes widened as if she'd offered him a kingdom. "Deal!" He climbed into the car and began attacking the dust with enthusiasm. Watching him, Grace noticed the quiet determination in his movements, the way he hummed under his breath, the way he paused to cough but kept going. She guessed life had already taught him how to fight small battles without complaint. As they worked, Grace told him about her plan, the Café, the name the hope of bringing people together in a town that had forgotten how. Eli listened with the serious focus of someone twice his age. "Mom likes coffee," he said. "Says it smells like mornings that used to be good. Then she'll get free coffee any time she wants," Grace promised. Outside, the wind shifted. Clouds rolled across the setting sun, and the first drops of rain began to patter on the roof. The sound was rhythmic, comforting, like the heartbeat of the old train itself. Grace paused by one of the windows, wiping away grime until she could see the landscape beyond the faded town sign. The distant diner now shuttered the road, curling toward the mountains. Somewhere inside that view lay the life she wanted to build. Eli set the broom down and pointed toward a small hatch near the floor. "Hey, what's that?" Grace followed his gaze. A narrow metal panel almost flush with the floorboards caught the light. It looked like a storage compartment maybe once used for tools. Probably nothing she said, but made a mental note to check it later. For now, she was content just to have company, to hear laughter echo against the steel walls. By evening, the rain had softened into drizzle. Grace locked up the train car, the brass key clicking like punctuation on a new sentence. Eli waved as he ran home through puddles, promising to return tomorrow with a bucket and rag. Alone again, Grace leaned against the door and looked back at the car glowing faintly under the street lamp. It wasn't much a shell, a relic, but it was hers. For the first time since losing her job, she felt the faint stir of hope. Maybe she thought this place isn't haunted by ghosts at all. Maybe it's haunted by dreams waiting to wake. And with that thought, she smiled small but real as the rain fell steady on the roof of her new beginning. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving behind a scent of wet pine and the quiet hush of a world washed clean. Willow Junction woke slowly, as it always did, one truck engine at a time, one coffee pot at a time. The clouds hung low over the mountains, and sunlight filtered through in pale ribbons, gilding the old train car that now belonged to Grace Miller. Dew glittered on the rusted bolts, and a small bird perched on the railing, singing as if blessing her project. Grace arrived early, bundled in a wool coat and scarf breath rising in small clouds. The key turned easily in the door now. She'd oiled the hinges the night before. Inside, the air was still cold, but somehow less lonely. Dust no longer dominated everything. Eli's hard work had made a difference. The boy showed up minutes later, panting, his cheeks red from the morning chill. He carried a small lunchbox, painted with fading superheroes. "Morning, Miss Grace," he called cheerfully, brushing snow off his sleeves. "Morning, Eli," she said, smiling as she handed him a rag. "You ready for round 2? He grinned and nodded. Together they swept, scrubbed, and hauled broken boards toward the door. Grace hummed faintly the same diner tune she used to play on the jukebox, an old habit of keeping rhythm with chores. Eli began to whistle along, off-key, but happy. By midday they reached the far end of the car where the floor dipped slightly near a rusted heater vent. Grace knelt to inspect it, brushing away grime. The edge of the wood caught her glove and something metallic glinted beneath. She frowned, pried with a screwdriver, and a small rectangular panel lifted up, revealing a hidden compartment sealed by time. "What's that?" Eli whispered, crouching beside her. "I don't know," Grace murmured, "but it's been here a long while." The air that rose from the hole was dry and old, carrying the faint scent of paper and oil. Inside was a small steel box, no bigger than a shoebox, its lid marked with faint initials, barely visible, under rust, L.H. Grace hesitated, her pulse quickening. She lifted it out carefully, fingers trembling as the metal protested with a creak. They set the box on the counter. Eli's eyes gleamed with the wide curiosity of youth. Maybe it's treasure. Maybe, Grace said softly, though something told her this wasn't gold or money. She found an old screwdriver, wedged it into the latch, and popped it open. Inside were neatly folded letters, their paper yellowed with age edges, fragile as dried leaves. The ink had bled in places, but the handwriting, elegant looping cursive, remained readable. On top of the stack lay a photograph, a woman in a nurse's uniform, her smile calm, but weary eyes, deep with the kind of sadness only war leaves behind. On the back in faded blue ink, it read, "Lydia Hartman, 1946. To remember what kindness built." Grace's breath caught. She unfolded the first letter carefully. April 2nd, 1946. To whoever finds this car when my days are done, my name is Lydia Hartman. I was a nurse in the war, and when I came home, I found there were more battles waiting here than overseas. The men came back with wounds no one could see, and the world had no place for them. So I made one this train car. I turned it into a refuge for the forgotten. Grace read the words aloud, her voice soft, steady. Eli listened silently, his brow furrowed. Some called it foolish, others dangerous, but I could not turn them away. This place is more than steel. It holds the warmth of those who once found rest here. If you hear whispers in the walls, they are not ghosts, they are gratitude. Grace finished the letter and sat in silence. The rain began again, light and tapping against the roof as if echoing the words. Eli leaned forward. She helped soldiers write, like my mom. Grace turned to him gently. Your mom was a medic, wasn't she? He nodded. Yeah, in Afghanistan. She doesn't talk about it much. Sometimes she just stares at the wall. She gets headaches and doesn't like loud noises. Doctor said it's something called PTSD. Grace put the letter down carefully. That sounds hard. Yeah, Eli said, kicking at the floor. She used to make pancakes every Sunday. Now she just drinks tea and listens to old radio shows. I think she misses helping people. Grace's heart ached. The story of Lydia Hartman, this woman who had healed strangers in a time of ruin, seemed to reach across decades, touching their small town like a quiet benediction. They spent the next hour reading through more letters. Each was a fragment of Lydia's life descriptions of the men she'd sheltered Tommy 22 burns on both legs, dreams of dancing again, or the kindness of locals who brought food and blankets. Some letters ended abruptly, as if interrupted by the arrival of another soul in need. The final envelope contained a pressed sprig of lavender and a simple line. If you find this, make it a place of warmth again. Grace closed the box slowly, her fingers lingering on the cool metal. She wanted people to keep helping, she whispered. Eli nodded solemnly. Like you're doing. Grace smiled faintly. Maybe like we're doing. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds at last, sending golden light through the grimy windows. Dust motes turned to glitter in the air. For a fleeting moment, the old train seemed alive, its steel walls warm, humming with echoes of laughter and healing. That evening, Grace walked Eli home. His trailer sat near the edge of town beside a half-frozen creek. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the smell of chamomile drifted on the air. Eli's mother, Mara, stood in the doorway, wrapped in a thick cardigan. She was in her mid-30s, pale, but striking her blonde hair pulled into a loose bun face, lined not with age, but exhaustion. Her green eyes softened when she saw Grace. You must be the new owner of that train car, Mara said, her voice low and kind, though tinged with fatigue. Eli hasn't stopped talking about you. Grace smiled. He's been my best helper. Mara laughed softly, then winced, as if laughter cost her something. He's got more energy than sense sometimes. I'm glad he's found something to do. Grace hesitated, then held out the small photograph of Lydia Hartman. We found this today. She used to be a nurse, helped veterans after the war. I thought maybe you'd want to see it. Mara's hands trembled slightly as she took it. She studied Lydia's face for a long time, eyes distant. She looks tired, Mara murmured, but proud. I know that feeling. She gave the photo back carefully. Thank you, Grace, for showing him something good. Not many people around here bother anymore. It's not just me, Grace said softly. Your son's got a kind heart. He keeps me going. Mara's eyes glistened. He gets that from his dad. Lost him overseas. Her voice broke just slightly, but she steadied it with practiced grace. It's been us two ever since. Grace reached out instinctively, touching her arm. You're doing great, Mara. Really? Mara nodded but didn't answer. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full of understanding, two women shaped by loss, both trying to rebuild something gentle in a hard world. When Grace walked back to the train car, dusk had settled, and the lights from town shimmered faintly in puddles. She climbed inside and sat on one of the benches, the letters spread before her. The air seemed different, now charged with purpose. She imagined Lydia sitting in the same spot 70 years ago, patching wounds by lantern light, offering tea and warmth to the broken. Grace whispered into the stillness, "I'll make this a place of warmth again. I promise." Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed across the valley, a lonely, haunting sound that seemed almost like an answer. The first snow of April came without warning, soft and steady, falling like sifted flour over the pine roofs of Willow Junction. The air turned brittle with cold, and the quiet town seemed to fold in on itself, smoke rising from chimneys, windows, glowing amber in the dusk. The train car stood at the edge of the rail yard, half covered in snow, its red paint dimmed to rose-gray. Inside, the old steel groaned faintly with the shifting temperature, and Grace Miller wrapped her hands around a tin mug of coffee, watching her breath cloud the air. She had spent the morning trying to rewire the place, using diagrams she barely understood. The coffee car was coming to life slowly. She'd sanded half the floorboards, patched the leaks, and scrubbed years of dust off the brass handles. But now she faced her greatest enemy, electricity. Every spark that jumped from the wires sent her heart racing. She needed help, and she knew it. That help arrived in the form of a tall man with wind-blown hair and a quiet, uncertain smile. He appeared that afternoon crunching across the snow-covered gravel with the gait of someone used to balancing on uneven ground. He wore a heavy denim jacket lined with fleece. His hands rough and calloused face lightly tanned by years of outdoor work. His eyes were an unreadable blue-gray, steady, but with the weary shadow of a man who had once lost everything he built. "Afternoon," he said, tipping his beanie slightly in greeting. "You Grace Miller?" Grace nodded a bit wary. "That's me. Can I help you?" He smiled faintly. "Word gets around quick in a town this small. Old Howard said you bought the car and were fighting with the wiring." "I'm Noah Walker, used to be an electrical engineer for the Northern Pacific Rail before they downsized." His voice carried that mix of politeness and fatigue that only the recently unemployed had perfected. "He thought you might need a hand." Grace hesitated only a second before relief overtook her pride. "I do, actually. I've been staring at wires for hours, and they're starting to look like spaghetti." Noah chuckled a low, warm sound. "Mind if I take a look?" Within minutes, he was kneeling beside the breaker box, pulling out tools from a worn leather bag. He worked with calm precision, humming an old tune under his breath. Grace watched him, fascinated by the confidence in his movements. He wasn't boastful, just methodical, the kind of man who seemed to fix more than things when he worked, like he was putting order back into the world one wire at a time. While he worked, Eli burst in, shaking snow from his jacket. "Miss Grace." "There's icicles hanging off the roof big as my arm." Then spotting Noah, he froze. "Who's he?" Grace smiled. "Eli, this is Mr. Noah Walker. He's helping me fix the lights." Eli's eyes widened. "Cool. You work with trains," used to Noah said with a small grin. "Built the systems that keep 'em moving. Guess now I'm just trying to keep the lights on anywhere I can." Eli seemed instantly intrigued. "My grandpa says the trains used to stop here all the time before the big companies took over." "They did?" Noah nodded. "Back when Willow Junction still had a heart." The boy's curiosity filled the space easily, asking about engines and switches while Grace brewed coffee on a small portable stove. By sunset, the entire car flickered to life, the old ceiling bulbs humming with soft golden light. Grace clapped her hands together, delighted. "You did it." Noah shrugged modestly. "She's got good bones, just needed a little care." That night, the snow thickened outside, blanketing the tracks until they looked like veins beneath frost. Grace offered Noah a simple deal: he could stay in the train car for a while, help her finish the repairs in exchange for shelter from the bitter Montana nights. He hesitated, pride flickering across his face, then nodded with quiet gratitude. "That's fair. I won't be any trouble." Over the next few days, they fell into an easy rhythm. Grace handled sanding, painting, and design ideas. Noah took on wiring, plumbing, and fixing the small vintage espresso machine she'd bought from a thrift shop in town. Eli showed up daily after school, carrying sandwiches his mother made and stories from class. The coffee car became a small ecosystem of warmth amid the snow-hammering laughter and the occasional hiss of steam from the repaired pipes. One evening, as the three sat near the little stove, Grace opened the steel box of letters again. She had been saving the remaining ones for when Noah could join them. He seemed drawn to the story of Lydia Hartman as much as she was. The letters had become their nightly ritual, like sitting around a campfire made of paper and memory. Grace read aloud while the wind howled softly outside. October 17th, 1946. Tonight, he came back, Samuel the soldier. They refused to serve at the diner because of the color of his skin. I gave him coffee here in this car. He laughed, saying it tasted better because it came without judgment. I think I love him, though the world would tear us both apart for it. Eli tilted his head. She loved him, but they couldn't be together. Noah sighed, leaning back against the wall. Not in 1946. Interracial couples were still treated like criminals in a lot of states. For a woman like her, a nurse unmarried, it would have ruined her life. Grace's eyes softened, and yet she did it anyway. I told Samuel I wanted to keep this place for people like us, those who can't find a seat anywhere else. He smiled and said, "Then this car will outlive us both." I hope he's right. Grace folded the letter carefully, her hands trembling slightly. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was reverent. The snow outside pressed against the windows, muting the world into stillness. Eli broke the quiet with a whisper. "Do you think she's still alive?" "No," Noah said gently. "But maybe the good she did still is." Grace nodded. She said there was something buried under this car, a treasure of kindness. Maybe it's not money. Maybe it's something else. Noah chuckled. "I wouldn't mind if it's gold. We could all use a miracle." They laughed softly, and the warmth of the stove filled the room. Yet, even as the moment lightened, Grace's gaze drifted to the floorboards near the back corner. Beneath them, she imagined the echo of footsteps, the hum of voices long gone. The train car had once held lives, love, loss, all stitched into its steel like veins in an old hand. That night, after Eli went home, Grace and Noah stayed behind, finishing a final coat of varnish. When she slipped on a step stool, Noah caught her instinctively, his hands firm around her arms. For a brief second, their eyes met, too close, too unsure. Grace blushed, stepping back. "Thanks," she murmured. "No problem," he said quietly, looking away with a small, almost shy smile. The air between them shifted, something tender but unspoken fragile, as the snow outside. As Noah prepared his small cot for the night, Grace stood by the door looking out at the falling snow. "You ever think about leaving this town?" she asked. He chuckled. "Used to. Thought I'd travel, build cities, fix things bigger than me. But the more I see of the world, the more I think the small things matter most." She nodded, her heart strangely full. "I think Lydia would have agreed." He smiled, his eyes reflecting the dim amber light. "Then maybe we're in the right place after all." Outside, the snow whispered against the steel, soft, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Inside, the coffee car glowed faintly, carrying not just the scent of coffee and paint, but of stories reborn. Grace fell asleep that night, knowing she was no longer alone in the echo of the past, and that the car's old warmth had finally begun to return. The storm came from the west, like an old grudge rolling over the mountains with a low, hungry growl. By dusk, the sky above Willow Junction had turned an angry shade of gray, and lightning forked across the hills in jagged bursts. The air smelled of rain and iron. The coffee car stood in the middle of it all, a lonely red scar against the storm's fury, its windows trembling with every gust. Inside, Grace Miller lit a lantern just as the power flickered out. Eli was sitting at the counter, sketching something on a napkin, a crude drawing of the train car with smiling faces in the windows. Noah was by the small stove, coaxing a pot of coffee to boil his sleeves, rolled up his movements, calm and measured, despite the thunder outside. "Guess we're testing how sturdy this old car really is," he said, his voice steady eyes, flicking to the ceiling as the wind howled harder. Grace smiled, though her nerves betrayed her. If she's survived 70 years, she'll survive one more night. A flash of lightning split the dark, followed almost instantly by a deafening crack. The sound was followed by something sharp, the distinct clang of metal meeting metal. The whole car jolted violently, and Grace nearly dropped the lantern. "What was that?" Eli gasped, eyes wide. "Lightning must have hit the rail line," Noah said, already moving toward the back. "Stay put." But Grace followed anyway, her heart pounding. Smoke curled from the far corner where the floorboards met the wall. When the smoke cleared, she saw it a blackened crack splitting the wooden planks, the scent of scorched resin heavy in the air. The lightning rod atop the car must have taken the hit, sending the current straight through the frame. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving the world drenched in quiet. The clouds hung low like tired sentinels. Grace and Noah opened the back hatch to let in air, their breath steaming in the cold. Eli poked curiously at the cracked floorboard with a stick. "We'll have to fix it before the opening," Noah said, examining the damage. Lucky it didn't start a fire. Grace knelt beside the splintered wood. Something gleamed faintly in the gap, not metal from the frame, but something smaller, deliberate. She brushed away the ash with her fingers and froze. "There's something down there." Together they pried the planks loose. Beneath them lay a narrow hollow sealed by rust and time. Inside was a small tin box, its surface blackened, but intact. Grace lifted it gently, her pulse quickening. It was heavier than it looked. When she pried open the lid, dust and the faint smell of oil escaped. Inside lay a gold pocket watch, its chain looped around a small leather notebook. The watch was elegant but worn and engraved with delicate filigree around the edge. She turned it over, breath-catching, as the inscription caught the morning light, "To Lydia for saving my life." For a long moment, no one spoke. Even Eli, who usually filled silence like sunlight, seemed reverent. Noah leaned closer. "That's real gold. Probably 1940s craftsmanship. Whoever gave her this? It wasn't casual." Grace opened the notebook next. Inside were neatly written names, dozens of them, in Lydia's graceful script. Each was followed by small notes: found work at mill, reunited with wife safe in Portland. Some names had small hearts beside them, others simple check marks. Toward the end, one entry stood out: Captain Robert Hensley, discharged, 1945, disappeared, winter 1947. Hensley Grace whispered. "That's the same name as my old boss at the diner." Noah nodded slowly. "Robert Hensley. That's a famous name in Montana history. He was a decorated veteran, went missing near the Canadian border in '47. People said he vanished with a company payroll, but others claimed he was killed protecting a group of homeless veterans from loan sharks. No one ever found the truth. Grace traced the engraved words on the watch with her thumb. Maybe Lydia did. Maybe this was his gift before he disappeared. They fell silent again, listening to the rain trickling from the roof. The discovery felt sacred, like uncovering the heartbeat of the car itself. Grace closed the box gently. "This isn't just a relic. It's proof that kindness mattered here. Over the next days, the story spread through Willow Junction like a whisper. People who had ignored the project began to stop by curious townsfolk. An old reporter from the Montana Tribune, even the local school principal, Mrs. DeWitt, a stout, kind woman in her 60s with gray curls and a voice that carried authority even when she whispered. She insisted on taking photos for the paper's Local Heroes column. Grace felt the car change around her, not just as a structure, but as a gathering place. Donations started coming in old photographs, vintage coffee mugs, small cash envelopes with notes like, "For Lydia's car," or "For the ones who helped." That's when the idea took shape. One evening, as the snow returned in gentle flurries, Grace gathered Noah and Eli at the counter. The gold watch lay in front of them, its ticking silent, but its message alive. "I want to start a fund," she said. "Something real, something that helps veterans and their families. Lydia saved lives here, and we can do the same." Eli's face lit up. Like a charity, Grace nodded. "Exactly. A foundation for people who need a place to heal. We'll call it Lydia's Promise Fund." Noah smiled, pride and warmth flickering in his tired eyes. "You think small towns like this will care?" "I think small towns like this remember," Grace said softly. From that night on, the coffee car became a beacon. Word traveled fast. A radio host in Bozeman mentioned it. Then a veteran support group offered to help with legal registration. Volunteers appeared, a retired accountant named Harriet Bloom, a thin woman in her late 50s with bright red glasses and an infectious laugh. Dan Keller, a young carpenter missing 2 fingers from a mill accident but full of good humor. And even Sheriff Moran, a grizzled man with a mustache that looked older than his badge, who offered to patrol the area at night just to keep the ghosts friendly. Every name and face added another thread to the tapestry Lydia had begun 70 years earlier. Meanwhile, Eli's mother Mara grew stronger. With help from the fund, she started therapy sessions in Missoula and medication for her PTSD. Grace saw the change in her, the way her eyes brightened when she spoke, how she lingered at the cafe, helping Grace organize donation jars, her laugh growing less fragile. One afternoon, Mara brought a stray dog, a golden retriever with 1 torn ear and a calm, soulful gaze. "His name's Scout," she said, smiling shyly. "He was abandoned near the lot. The vet says he's about 4. Thought maybe he'd like to live here." Scout became the coffee car's unofficial guardian, always lounging by the doortail, wagging at every customer. Children adored him, and veterans often petted him in silence, as though finding comfort in his quiet loyalty. By early May, the first official event for Lydia's Promise Fund took place, a small gathering where local musicians played, and Grace stood beside Noah on the improvised stage. She held the gold watch in her palm as she spoke. "This car began as a refuge," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "It was built by hands that refused to stop helping. Lydia's promise is that kindness never rusts. It just waits for someone to find it again." The crowd applauded softly. Noah reached for her hand under the table, their fingers intertwining in a silent acknowledgement of everything that had brought them here, the storms, the ghosts, the chance that lightning had struck just where it needed to. And as night fell over Willow Junction, the coffee car glowed warm and golden beneath the stars, the watch gleaming faintly in Grace's pocket like a promise kept. The morning of the grand opening arrived painted in white, a quiet snowfall drifting through Willow Junction, soft as feathers. The whole town seemed to hum beneath the gentle frost smoke, curling from chimney shop windows, fogged with warmth. The old railway lot, once forgotten, now pulsed with life. The coffee car gleamed under a new coat of crimson paint, gold lettering curling elegantly across its side, "The Coffee Car at Willow Junction." The scent of roasted beans and fresh bread mingled with pine and winter air. Grace Miller stood just outside the door, breath fogging, as she adjusted the small open sign. Her brown hair, pinned neatly beneath a wool beret, shimmered faintly with snowflakes. She wore a dark green sweater and a long apron with the logo stitched by hand, Lydia's Promise Fund, written in fine cursive along the pocket. Her heart beat faster than the town clock. For months she had scrubbed, painted, repaired, dreamed, and now it was real. Noah Walker appeared behind her carrying a tray of pastries. His jacket was dusted with flour, his cheeks red from the cold. There was a calmness about him now, a steadiness that came from finding purpose again. His once tired eyes held the quiet contentment of someone who'd stopped running. "You're trembling," he teased gently. "Cold or nerves?" both Grace admitted, smiling. "It doesn't feel real." "It will the moment you open that door." Inside Scout, the golden retriever thumped his tail lazily against the floor, watching the bustle with patient amber eyes. Eli was already inside arranging sugar jars and humming to himself, his enthusiasm filling every inch of space. Mara stood near the counter, her posture straighter than Grace had ever seen, a faint smile warming her face. Therapy had done wonders. The dark circles beneath her eyes had softened her laughter, now came freely. By 10 o'clock the first customers arrived, townsfolk, bundled in scarves and curiosity. Among them was Harriet Bloom, the accountant, with her signature red glasses. She waved proudly before taking a seat near the window. Dan Keller followed with a bouquet of paper flowers his daughter had made. Even Sheriff Moran stopped by, stomping snow off his boots and declaring in his gravelly baritone, "Smells better than any crime scene I've been to." Grace laughed, nerves melting. The little café filled quickly with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of cups. The local paper had sent a reporter, a tall woman named Clara Devine, about 35, with sharp eyes softened by a genuine smile. She wore a long camel coat and carried a small notepad. Her hair was the color of dark honey, tied back in a neat braid. Clara had made her name writing community stories, the kind about small towns doing big things. "Grace Miller?" she asked, stepping up to the counter. "Clara Devine, Montana Chronicle. I've been hearing quite a story about this place and the woman who brought it back to life." Grace blushed, brushing flour from her sleeve. "It's not just me. This car's had help from a lot of hands. I just listened to what it wanted to be." Clara smiled, intrigued. "That might be the best quote I've heard all month. Mind if I take some photos?" "Of course." As Clara wandered, capturing Scout Eli's grin and the soft lamplight against steel walls, Grace prepared a tray of coffee and pastries for the crowd. The old espresso machine hissed and gleamed like new steam rising in golden curls. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the world in silence, but inside the air buzzed with warmth and life. At midday the door creaked open again, letting in a gust of cold wind and a figure wrapped in a thick gray coat. The woman was elderly, perhaps in her late 80s, with fine silver hair pinned under a knitted hat, and eyes a piercing shade of blue that seemed to see everything and yet soften with kindness. She moved slowly, leaning on a polished wooden cane, her gloved hands trembling slightly. "Hello there," Grace greeted warmly. "Please come in from the cold." The old woman smiled faintly. "Thank you, dear. I almost didn't come, but when I read the article in the Tribune, I knew I had to see this place with my own eyes." Her voice trembled slightly, a soft rasp like parchment turning in the wind. Grace guided her to a seat near the window. "Would you like some coffee on the house today?" "That would be lovely," the woman said. "My name's Margaret Ellison. I was a nurse once, long ago, in the late 40s. Grace froze, the words sinking in like a whisper from the past. "You were a nurse?" "Yes," Margaret nodded slowly, unbuttoning her coat with careful hands. "I worked in Missoula after the war, but before that I spent a few months here in Willow Junction. I helped another nurse, Lydia Hartman." The cafe fell silent for a heartbeat. Even the clatter of cups seemed to pause. Grace set the coffee pot down gently, her throat tight. You knew Lydia Margaret's eyes misted with memory. I did, dear. She was my mentor, brave, soft-spoken, stubborn as a train wheel. She taught me that healing doesn't always come from medicine. Sometimes it comes from a roof, a kind word, or a cup of something warm. Eli, standing nearby, whispered to Mara, "That's her. That's really her friend." Grace reached into her apron pocket and took out the gold watch. She laid it on the table, the chain coiling like sunlight. "We found this here, under the floorboards. It belonged to someone Lydia saved, a Captain Robert Hensley." Margaret's breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out fingertips, brushing the engraved words. Oh my! Lydia used to wear that around her neck. She said it reminded her why she stayed, why she kept helping, even when no one thanked her. She said kindness was like light under snow, buried but still burning. A tear slipped down her cheek as she whispered, "Lydia always said, goodness finds its way home." And I suppose it has. Grace felt her chest tighten, the weight of months of stories, storms, and hope pressed into that moment. She reached across the table, taking Margaret's hand in hers. "It has," she said softly. Noah came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers naturally. Eli leaned against her apron, eyes shining. Outside, snowflakes caught the light like drifting embers. Clara quietly snapped a photo, not of the watch nor the cafe, but of the 3 generations holding hands under the glow of lanterns, the old, the weary, and the young. Later, that photograph would run in the Chronicle under the headline, "Kindness Comes Home to Willow Junction." As the afternoon faded, more people arrived, drawn by the story. Veterans, school teachers, families, strangers, all stepping into the warmth. Scout wagged his tail as each entered, as if greeting old friends. Laughter filled the space, mingling with the hiss of coffee and the rhythm of the snow outside. At closing time, the last guest left, and the world quieted again. Grace turned off the lights one by one until only the lantern by the window remained. She stepped outside, hand in hand, with Noah Eli at her side, Scout trotting ahead, tail swaying. The dawn light began to bloom faintly across the horizon, the first pink of morning touching the mountains. Grace looked up at the sign above the door, where frost glimmered like silver dust. The letters caught the sunlight perfectly. The coffee car, where stories begin again. She exhaled her breath white in the new day. The past had found peace. The present had found purpose. And in the small heartbeat of that train car, the future had quietly begun. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness become the greatest miracles. Grace didn't set out to change the world, she simply wanted to fix an old train car. Yet, through love, faith, and courage, she rebuilt not only a cafe, but the hearts of everyone around her. It reminds us that God often works quietly through ordinary hands, in ordinary places, turning rust into beauty and broken stories into blessings. If you believe that kindness still has the power to heal, share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below, write Amen, and let us pray together that God continues to guide our hearts toward compassion and mercy. May the Lord bless everyone watching, protect your families, and fill your days with peace and small miracles that remind you faith still moves mountains.